Hi everyone. I'm going to be walking you through a module that I do with my 8th graders involving evidence-based argumentative writing. The module's theme is called Taking a Stand. So how we start the module is by doing a gallery walk with some of these images to have students start making predictions about some of the things that we're going to be reading and looking at in the next few months. In this lesson, we will look at our first mentor text to see how Shirley Chisholm proved her claim that women should have equal rights. So some challenges that I've seen with my students since getting them acclimated with Canvas is that they don't like annotating texts right there on the screen. Unfortunately, this year the EOG will be on the computer, so we've been trying to get them used to something called DocHub, that they can read the text and make gist statements on the side by typing, or they can underline things and highlight them, but it seems to actually be slowing them down and frustrating them to the point that they just stop. So my PLC and I made almost like a bubble map for them where they write their gist statements around what is ultimately going to be their central idea. And it's actually starting to work. I've done it a few times with my students thus far. And it's pretty cool to watch them create this and eventually see how adding all those gist statements together formulate their central idea. So when we start with this speech, the first thing we want to make sure that they do is that they look at the title. They write it up here at the top, and then based on that title, Equal Rights for Women, they come to the conclusion that the topic of the speech is going to be that someone is trying to help women fight or take a stand for equal rights. I basically walked them through this first one myself. So we went over all of these things, looking at the top of the speech where it said the date, the location, and the fact that it's addressed to Mr. Speaker, letting them know that it's either a letter or a speech. And we also talked about who their Shirley Chisholm's audience was and how to write correct gist statements. Because what we also are seeing is that instead of them kind of summarizing what they read into their own words, is they're actually just trying to pull textual evidence out of each paragraph, which we believe is the text evidence that they think is the most important from that paragraph, instead of trying to summarize what the whole paragraph itself is talking about. So we try and explain that the who and the what of each paragraph is the most important part. So after we've read a few things in the beginning, we eventually get to the part that after reading paragraphs 2 and 3, that the gist statement is that men think women can only do simple jobs, based on key details like the fact that women were asked, do you type? And that Shirley Chisholm said this was a demeaning experience. So all of these things led to a gist statement of men think women can only do simple jobs. And that one was pretty easy for them. So as we continued and we identified these key details later on in the passage, they started getting to the hang of it that once you see things like different and inferior, for often are discriminated against because I am a woman, what Shirley Chisholm is trying to say is that she's actually felt worse about being a woman in the political world than maybe even being African American herself. So by the time we get to paragraphs 13 and 14, they're ultimately doing these things on their own and should come up with these gist statements or something similar. So after they've gone through all of that and we've dissected and done the first analysis of equal rights for women, they have these text-dependent questions that they have to answer to get even more thorough analysis out of it. I did have to break this up into 2 lessons, but based on how long your block size is or how quick you think your students can pick up on this, might vary that a little bit. So here are some of the text questions that deal with what's going on in the beginning portion of the speech. I have the answers there for them that we talk about after they've spent about 20 minutes doing this on their own. And then we get into just a few more to, again, reiterate them coming up with the key points, the key details, and the summary of each one of these paragraphs. So this is super important for them because that night for homework, they have to write their first quick write. And again, what my students struggle with the most is taking the ideas from the text and putting it into their own words. So the prompt for that evening is, why is Shirley Chisholm taking a stand for women's rights rather than African American rights? Use specific evidence from the text. So this is a super challenging question for them, especially if they don't understand what the question's actually asking. And the question is actually asking, why is she choosing women's rights rather than African American rights? So they need to go back into the text and find that specific evidence that explains why Shirley Chisholm thinks the fight is really more for women at this point rather than African Americans. And most importantly, explaining why. I told my students that the explaining the why after they figured out the answer is the most important part, because that's giving them, your reader, your audience, the details they need to know to see what your point is, to see how you answer this question without any reasonable doubt. So that is all for that first lesson. Thank you very much.